history from Mr. JONCHUCK?
Yes.
Anything that remarkable as far as his medical history?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, he reported that in 2011 he herniated a couple of discs in his back when he fell at the Cheesecake Factory. He had a spinal cord stimulator implanted in his back in 2013. He also reported having a history of seizures beginning when he was either 23 or 24.
Now, after developing all that information, did you then start to develop a mental health history for Mr. JONCHUCK?
Yes.
Did you use that mental health history in developing or determining whether Mr. JONCHUCK suffers from a mental illness?
Yes.
Does he suffer from a mental illness?
Yes.
Did you use that information to develop a diagnosis?
Yes.
What is your diagnosis?
My diagnosis of him at the time was bipolar disorder with psychotic features.
Okay. Is that diagnosis a diagnosis that's recognized by the DSM-5?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury just briefly what is the DSM-5?
DSM-5 is this book here. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's the 5th edition, and it's really the main book that mental health individuals, professionals use in diagnosing clients that they see, or in my case, defendants.
All right. The diagnosis, tell it to me again.
Bipolar disorder with psychotic features.
Can you explain to the jury what that means?
Yes. Bipolar, it really consists of two main groups of symptoms. One is bipolar and one is psychosis. For bipolar disorder, people have manic episodes and can have depressive episodes. It used to be known as manic depression. In a manic episode, they can have episodes in which they feel euphoric. They feel extremely cheerful. They feel like they're on top of the world, and for no apparent reason. It's not like something's happened in their life for them to feel this way. It's just that this feeling comes upon them. They can also have mood swings where they become irritable and agitated. There are also a number of other symptoms that they can have, which include grandiosity or an inflated self-esteem. They can have problems with sleep, insomnia, sometimes going days without sleeping. Their thinking can be distractible. They can have racing thoughts, one thought on top of the other, and that is displayed by having pressured speech, that they talk one thought after the other, sometimes not even pausing between sentences. They can also get involved with certain activities almost to an obsessive level, such as religion. And they can also get involved with reckless behaviors. A symptom which is often seen is they overspending on their credit cards, money that they don't have. They can get involved in foolish investments or foolish business schemes. On the other side, they can get into depressive episodes where they feel depressed, they feel sad, they feel hopeless, helpless. They have problems with sleep, concentration, appetite, and to the extreme they'll have suicidal ideation. They'll think about committing suicide. That's the bipolar part. Psychotic features is a whole nother set of symptoms.
And did you prepare any materials to aid the jury in your testimony today?
Yes.
Did you prepare any materials to aid the jury today in your explanation of psychotic symptoms and psychotic features?
Yes.
Judge, if I may approach the witness.
Sure.
This what you prepared?
Yes.
It would help the jury understand your testimony today.
Yes.
Would you like to see this? Roy?
No. Is that a demonstrative
A
exhibit?
demonstrative exhibit, Judge.
Any objection?
There you go. Doctor, I'm going to set this up so the jury can see it. If you need to move in order to explain it, please do.
Yeah, so that there are a number of symptoms related to psychosis. One of the symptoms is a delusion. A delusion is a false belief, an irrational false belief, that no matter what evidence you show to that person to try to prove to them that this belief is not true, they still will hold on to that belief. An example is a paranoid delusion. An example of a paranoid delusion might be that somebody thinks that the CIA or the FBI have put microphones in their head and are tracking them and following them. And you can show them x-rays and MRIs of their brain, of their head, and show them there's no microphones in their head, but they'll hold on to that there are microphones in their head and that they are being tracked by the CIA and the FBI. So that's one symptom of psychosis.
That's delusions?
That's delusions.
What are hallucinations?
Hallucinations come in many different forms. Usually it's auditory and visual hallucinations. Auditory hallucinations is hearing voices when nobody's speaking. It's seeing things that nobody else can see. It can also include olfactory hallucinations, which are smelling things when there's nothing to smell. Or somatic hallucinations, feeling things when there's nothing on them.
You also have on here disorganized thinking. What's that?
Disorganized thinking it's a continuum. It can start off where an individual is distracted. Then it can be that they lose their train of thought. And it can go to the extreme where their thinking is irrational. It's nonsensical. And the thing you can't see thinking, so the way that we look at disorganized thinking is that through behaviors, through speech, through writings. And through speech, individuals will be circumstantial or tangential. Circumstantial is where they kind of veer off the topic of conversation. Tangential is going from topic to topic to topic. And then as the psychosis gets worse, the speech is irrational and can become incoherent, so you don't even understand what they're saying. And the same is true for disorganized writing. You'll see that type of symptom in the writings as well.
What is grossly disorganized behavior?
Grossly disorganized behavior is behavior, first of all, that can be impulsive. It can be where an individual is acting but without purpose. And then to the extreme level, they're acting in an irrational, bizarre type of manner.
And then lastly, you have negative symptoms. What are those?
The negative symptoms, there's a number of different symptoms that relate to negative symptoms, but most common is having no expression, where in most circumstances individuals will have expressions. If they're angry, they'll show an angry expression. If they're happy, they'll show a happy expression. But for the individual experiencing a psychosis, no matter what they may be feeling, it's flat, no expression whatsoever.
What is a flat affect or flat affect?
No expression. No, that's what a flat affect is.
All right, so can you give, let me just ask you, what's a blank stare?
That can also be part of a flat affect.
Okay.
No expression on one's face.
Okay, and those are examples of negative symptoms?
That would be in the category of negative symptoms.
All right. Now, doctor, let me ask you a question. Jumping back for a second to the family history, did you look into the background of Michelle JONCHUCK?
I asked John about his mother.
Did you find any evidence that Michelle JONCHUCK suffered from a mental illness?
He reported that she had a history of bipolar disorder.
Did you also review any other records from the DCF?
Yes.
Okay. Mental illness, wait, what did he tell you she had?
Bipolar disorder.
That's the same thing he has?
That's what I diagnosed him with at the time of the offense.
Is mental illness, is there does it run in families?
Certain disorders do, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, psychotic types of disorders are genetically linked. You see it runs in families.
Doctor, we went through some of the records, some of the things that you reviewed. Did you rely on those to form your diagnosis in this case?
Yes.
Did you summarize those in a PowerPoint presentation?
A great deal of it is on PowerPoint presentation, yes.
Would that aid the jury in understanding your testimony?
I believe so.
May you step down? Now, in developing this PowerPoint, did you have a theory or a plan as to how to present this? In other words, is it presented in chapters, chronological?
It's mainly presented in chronological order.
So in presenting this, in compiling this PowerPoint, you were attempting to bring to the jury things that you think are important in explaining your diagnosis and your opinion?
Yes.
What is the first thing you felt was important? Clickers never work.
Please repeat the question.
What was the first thing that you noticed chronologically that you felt was important to document in your diagnosis and your opinion?
Well, that at the age of either 5 or 6, records indicated that John was diagnosed with ADHD. That stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, the main symptoms related to that disorder are inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity. And the disorder was so severe he was prescribed medications at that time.
Now, and you said prescribed medications. Does that mean he obviously went to a physician or a medical doctor, correct?
He reported that he went to USF and was prescribed by medications by a doctor there.
What is the next thing you thought that was important?
The next was that at the age of 12, he was receiving mental health treatment. So he was receiving mental health treatment from 5 to 6 to 12, and there's indications that he was also receiving treatment in between that as well.
Doctor, just to focus on this the screen here for a second. Obviously, that's you, right?
Yes.
What is this right here?
It's the year as well as his age at the time.
All right. And then along the bottom here, what do we have?
We have the chronological timeline.
Okay. All right, so at the age of 12, he's already receiving mental health treatment?
He's receiving mental health treatment beginning 5 or 6, but he continued to receive mental health treatment at the age of 12.
Were you ever able to determine who provided that treatment?
No.
Were you ever able to determine if there was a diagnosis way back then?
No, it seemed the ADHD, ADD was a running diagnosis in his childhood years.
And then, a few years later, what were you able to determine?
Well, at the age of 16, he was Baker acted to Morton Plant Hospital, the Child Adolescent Psychiatric Unit. And to understand what a Baker Act is when a person is involuntarily psychiatrically hospitalized. It can be done by a mental health professional, it can be done by a police officer, but the determination is made that they are at risk to harm themselves or to harm others. They can be experiencing psychotic disorders, hallucinations, delusions, but unless they are deemed to be a risk to themselves or others, that's the criteria one looks at when doing a Baker Act.
So, we're we've heard the term Baker Act before. We've heard the term involuntary committed, but can you break it down? I mean, what's it mean to be involuntarily committed?
Well, it's when you're put into a psychiatric hospital without your consent. You are deemed to be a risk to yourself or others, and so you are forced into that psychiatric hospital.
You are held there.
You are held there.
Not free to leave.
Not free to leave until you're evaluated and determined that you're not a risk to yourself or others.
And during this time period, was there a diagnosis?
He was diagnosed with major depression and prescribed a medication. So major depression, I spoke about that a little bit before, where somebody is feeling depressed, sad, hopeless, helpless, and possibly feeling suicidal at the time. And they can have problems with sleep, appetite, concentration. Those are all symptoms of a major depression.
Doctor, I use the term depressed just in normal conversation. Is there a difference between the common usage of the word depressed or depression and the clinical or medical term major depression?
Well, I think that you're looking at the distinction between sadness and depression. We all feel sad at times. There's things in our lives that happen to us that we feel sad about. What the major depression is about is that these symptoms related to this sadness and all these other symptoms interfere with functioning. A person is not able to function because of these feelings that they're experiencing.
Do you treat sadness with medications?
Usually not.
So then this prescribed medications, this again means that a physician, a medical doctor, determined that he was in need of medicine?
Yes.
Okay. What else can you tell us about that age?
Well, while he was at Morton Plant, they did some interviews with family members. They interviewed his stepmother, Nikki JONCHUCK, and she reported that John has a long history of mental health issues and is on medication. So there's the indication that he wasn't just treated at 5 and 6 and then 12 and then 16, but this is mental health issues which have been ongoing. His father reported the same. He reported that John has a long history of mental health problems, including ADHD, ADD, as well as having unspecified behavioral problems, acting out types of problems, and that he had been taking medication through the years.
Is there a difference between ADHD and ADD?
The difference is ADD is attention deficit disorder. It doesn't have the hyperactivity component to it. It's not, that's the distinction. So it really doesn't make sense to have both ADHD and ADD.
So if you've got this one, you automatically have this one?
Yes.
And so then what you're telling me is that at the age of 16, his stepmother and his father had said at 16 he's already had a long history of mental health problems?
Yes.
What's the next thing you noticed that was important to you?
We jumped to age 21. He began seeing a psychiatrist, Dr. Gary Arthur. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor with specialized training in mental disorders.
And were you able to review Dr. Arthur's notes?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see anything in Dr. Arthur's notes? Well, let's go this way. What did Dr. Arthur do for him?
Well, Dr. Arthur diagnosed him with, well, he noted some of the history. It appears he took some history from Mr. JONCHUCK and noted that John was first diagnosed at USF, that he was diagnosed with ADD, attention deficit disorder, and he was prescribed Ritalin, which is a common medication for ADHD and ADD.
What else did you learn from Dr. Arthur's report?
He also described that John at the time was having manic episodes, and in particular he saw John as having difficulties with irritability and having anger problems.
Now, you mentioned that bipolar used to be called manic depression. So these reports are from back in 2011. Is this manic episodes, is that an indication of manic depression?
Or bipolar disorder, either one.
Okay, so in other words, we don't know whether Dr. Arthur had, we just switched the name for the same symptoms from...
Well, with bipolar disorder, there's still manic episodes that a person experiences. They have to have manic episodes to have bipolar disorder, and they can also have depressive episodes. So it's still the same term that is used.
Okay, so these manic episodes, do we see the introduction at any point in time here from Dr. Arthur of any medications?
Yes. Well, in addition to having manic episodes, he also saw that John was having severe panic attacks. Panic attacks are an anxiety disorder where somebody will have episodes in which they will have heart palpitations, they will become very shaky, they will start sweating. They'll have paresthesias, which is like tingling in the fingers and toes. They will have chest pain so severe that they think that they're having a heart attack. Those are some of the symptoms that an individual will have while they're having panic attacks. And he diagnosed John, again, age 21, with bipolar disorder, panic disorder, and ADHD.
All right, and these were all from Dr. Arthur back in 2011.
Correct.
Did you review some more of Dr. Arthur's records?
In order to treat these disorders, he prescribed him Abilify, and he noted that the Abilify was to help with the mood swings that John was experiencing. He also prescribed Adderall, which was is a medication to treat ADHD or ADD, and that was noted to try to help him with his studying at the time.
Now, are you getting all this information from just one piece of paper, or reviewing all of the reports from Dr. Arthur that you were given?
I was able to review all of Dr. Arthur's progress notes in his treatment of Mr. JONCHUCK.
So when you say you were reviewing progress notes, are you walking us through the Dr. Arthur's reports from the beginning to later?
I'm not highlighting every single note. I'm highlighting specific notes which give a real flavor as to the types of issues that Mr. JONCHUCK was experiencing at the age of between 21 and 23.
Okay, keep going if you would, please.
This was a note from January 23rd, 2012. He indicated that John is having problems with anger episodes, but he also noted that John is having issues with paranoia at this time. He's having problems with agitation. He's blowing up at people and throwing things. So we see issues of mania, manic episodes, as well now paranoia. Paranoia would go under the psychotic symptoms of delusions.
So at this point then, we're seeing signs of delusions?
Yes. Well, yes. He was prescribed Seroquel, which is a medication which is commonly used to treat bipolar disorder as well as psychotic disorders. Zoloft, which is a medication often used to treat depression, as well as Ambien, which is a medication to help with sleep. And if you recall, part of a manic episode is having problems with sleep.
This one, Seroquel, is he still on that?
I believe so.
Thank you.
The next note that is highlighted is from December 2012 when he was 23 years old. Some of the symptoms that Dr. Arthur noted was that John was experiencing somatic hallucinations. So now he's experiencing hallucinations where he's feeling his skin bubbling, but there's no evidence that his skin is actually bubbling. He quoted John as saying, "I'm losing it."
Hold on. Who quoted, what was that?
That was Dr. Arthur quoting John.
Okay, so John told Dr. Arthur, "I'm losing it"?
Yes.
Okay.
He also noted that John had seen Dr. Bora at the Florida Community Hospital, who indicated that John was totally disabled.
Did Dr. Arthur communicate what Dr. Bora, I mean, I know we have an opinion of totally disabled, but did he say why or what it was?
Dr. Bora's evaluation related to seizure activity.
Okay.
And Dr. Arthur diagnosed John at that time with having bipolar and possible partial seizures. And Dr. Arthur's own evaluation of John at the time is that John was really totally disabled. Now we're continuing, still reviewing more of Dr. Arthur's reports? Yes. And this is in March 13th of 2013. So now we're moving down along this timeline here? Correct. All right. And what he indicated was that John wanted to work, but he can't do it, he can't concentrate, and he's also having problems with anger and irritability. He's continuing on the Seroquel, which is the medication for bipolar disorder and psychotic symptoms. And he also prescribed him Xanax, which is a medication most often used to treat anxiety. Dr. Arthur noted that John's affect, his facial expression was depressed and anxious, and he was down on himself, meaning he was self-deprecating. He was speaking negatively about himself. Dr. Arthur wrote that John is disabled. He seems to be able to get a job, but he can't hold on to it due to his psychological problems. Now this area here, couldn't concentrate. How is that an example of disorganized thinking, or is it just moving toward disorganized thinking? It could be a number of things. It can be moving towards disorganized thinking. It can also be part of his depression. A symptom of depression is problems with concentration. So it can't make that determination at this point. So we can't check this box yet? No. What else did you learn from that? He also summarized in this note that it's been 3 years now, at least, that John has been experiencing bipolar disorder, and anxiety disorder, and attention deficit disorder.
So this isn't just something that happened over the last couple months?
No. This note is from September of 2013, and Dr. Arthur noted that John has had more seizures, and in fact went to Florida Hospital because of the seizure activity. And what John reported was that he was thinking that he was having seizures because they were being brought on by stress.
All right, and that last one was, you said, when was that, September of?
That was March of 2013.
March in 2013, all right, and then now we're moved on to September and November 2013. No, September and November 2014.
2014, so we're jumping approximately a year.
All right, and so we're still continuing on our timeline going this way, correct?
Correct.
All right, what do we know at this point?
Okay, in September of 2014, John reported in my evaluation with him that he started to hear voices. He was hearing voices telling him that he was bad and that he was going to hell. It's noted that at this time, too, he had a prescription for Seroquel. Seroquel is, again, the medication for bipolar disorder and psychotic symptoms. And he tried to get it filled at Walgreens, but they didn't fill it because the prescription had expired by that time. And from the note that I reviewed, I guess they contacted Dr. Arthur, but Dr. Arthur noted that John was no longer a patient of his, so did not authorize the refill of that medication. So September, he doesn't have his medications. He starts to hear voices.
And you already told us about a somatic hallucination, and now we have
This would be an auditory hallucination.
auditory hallucination. So now we have two here, right?
What he also said was he had a little bit of the medication left, so what he tried to do is to ration it out, break it in half, take it not every day, but the medications are prescribed to take at the full dose each and every time that it's prescribed for, so breaking it in half, he's not getting the full therapeutic dose that he was prescribed. So whether he's taking a half or none at all, he's not getting the medication that he needs to treat the symptoms that he's experiencing. So he started expressing a belief that he was going to hell. Again, this is what the voices were telling him.
Now, is that another delusion?
It went along with the auditory hallucination. Yes, it would be
Okay.
a delusion as well.
All right. Now I see Thanksgiving, Christmas, 2014. I see nothing on the board. Okay.
During this time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it was noted that John and Michelle's relationship seemed to be more amicable. It seemed to be more friendly. They had Thanksgiving dinner together, him, Phoebe, Michelle, Kerr, as well as her boyfriend Guy, and it seemed to go well. As the time period went by, Michelle saw Phoebe a little bit more, and they actually had Christmas dinner together. It was indicated that John was not drinking or drugging at the Christmas, and after the Christmas dinner, he thanked Michelle and Guy for having them over for Christmas.
So does this mean that he's all better?
It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that in looking at the relationship itself between John and Michelle, there was not the indications of animosity during this particular time period.
So is his, or are mental illnesses, are they exaggerated by stress?
Yes.
Is this a period where it's stressful or less stressful?
Well, we're not getting a full picture of what he was like at that time, he was experiencing at the time. I mean, what he reported to me was during this whole period of time, he is hearing voices. They're not overwhelming to him. He's still able to function to a degree. He's still having an amicable relationship. But it doesn't mean that he's not experiencing symptoms of psychosis or symptoms of bipolar during this time.
But is there something that happens around this time too that's noteworthy? That you noted in your PowerPoint? On the next one?
During, and this is an indication that he's still experiencing psychotic symptoms, that during Christmas dinner, at one point John goes outside. Guy Kisser, Michelle's boyfriend, goes outside as well. And what Guy Kisser reports is that he saw John talking to himself. And this was something that John reported that he had been doing more of during this period of time, that he was talking more to himself.
Okay, but this slide right here, this part of the slide right here, John talking to himself, that report comes from who?
Guy Kisser.
All right, and that's Guy Kisser telling you what he saw?
Yes.
Right.
Well, not telling me. It was in his deposition.
Okay.
And individuals talking to themselves, that is a possible indicator that they're experiencing auditory hallucinations and responding back to those voices that they're hearing.
All right, what's you have here, December 29th, 2014 at 3:42 a.m. John's 25 years old. What's the significance of this slide?
What happened was John went to the emergency department of St. Joseph's Hospital, and it appears that he was having a panic attack. He was reporting having heart palpitations. He was feeling like his heart was racing. He reported feeling jittery over the last several weeks. So as I noted in the last slide, even though he was having more of an amicable and more friendly relationship with Michelle, he's still experiencing symptoms of anxiety and possibly hallucinations and delusions as well. And what would happen in this instance is that he woke up in the middle of the night feeling extremely anxious. He was evaluated by the staff at St. Joseph's Hospital, and the conclusion was that he was not having a heart attack, that the symptoms were being brought on by anxiety.
A heart attack, is that a mental illness?
No.
Okay. Is anxiety an indication of mental illness?
Anxiety, if it's interfering with functioning, which it was for John, is a mental illness.
Okay, so he goes to the hospital thinking he's having a heart attack.
Yes. He was just reporting problems. He didn't report that I'm having a heart attack. He reported I'm having all these types of symptoms.
Okay, he reports he's having problems with his heart,
Yes.
and they tell him it's not your heart,
It's anxiety.
it's his mind.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, keep going.
He also noted in my evaluation with him that at this point the voices start changing a little bit. The voices start changing from he's bad and he's going to hell to they're getting louder, and they're starting to indicate that he's possessed and Phoebe is possessed. A couple of days later, he files a petition for injunction for protection against domestic violence without children.
Right. Petition for protection against domestic violence without children?
Yes.
He has children though, right?
Yes, the petition itself didn't make sense because he even had Phoebe's name on the petition. Yet there's two different forms. There's one form with children and there's another form without children. And he filled out the form without children, even though, number one, he has a child, and number two, he even put her name right on the petition.
What did this cause you?
Well, it was, first of all, we're talking about the disorganized thinking and behavior at this time where even though he's looking to put in this petition, he's got it wrong. And the petition itself was very disorganized as well. Although if you look at the content of the petition, he raises concerns about there being a lack of food in the home for Phoebe. He reported that Michelle Kerr was under the influence when she was around Phoebe, that she was using alcohol and or drugs. And that Michelle's boyfriend, Guy Kisser, had been arrested for domestic violence against Michelle, and there is documentation to show that there were incidents of domestic violence between Guy Kisser and Michelle. He also reported that there were weapons and ammunition in the home, in Michelle Kerr's home.
And so at this point now, we're starting to see the disorganized thinking.
Yes.
And we had somatic, we had auditory, and then you're saying we have more auditory hallucinations at this point as well?
Yes. And they're getting louder.
So the check mark's getting bigger.
It was also around this time, well, interviews were done with several family members after Phoebe's death. And they asked the family members about John's behavior in the days, in the weeks prior to Phoebe's death. And some of the statements that were made, John Chuck Sr., his father, reported that John was putting salt around the house for weeks to keep out evil spirits. He said that his son said that Phoebe was possessed. He noted that John was speaking a lot about God. He was becoming more religiously preoccupied. And this was odd because John had never been very religious before. So for him all of a sudden to be preoccupied, religiously preoccupied, was very odd in the mind of his father. He also started carrying around the Bible and sleeping with the Bible. What John told to me about the Bible was that he had asked for this big Swedish brown Bible from his stepmother. It's early January. And as soon as he got this Bible, he heard a knocking coming from the Bible, which he didn't know what that was about. That would be an auditory hallucination.
And how about the keeping out evil spirits? Is that a delusion?
Yes, that would be like a paranoid delusion, that evil spirits were coming after him.
And how about Phoebe being possessed? Is that a
Same,
delusion?
paranoid delusions. He also told me that he would keep this Bible with him all the time. And the reason that he kept the Bible with him all the time was he felt that it would ward off the demons. So he would sleep with it. He would carry it with him wherever he went. And as I noted before, he said that John Jr. wasn't very religious before this time. And what was also noted was that he did not see John using alcohol or drugs during this time either.
And this information was provided to you by John's father, John Sr.?
It wasn't provided to me, it was provided to law enforcement.
Okay.
His stepmother reported around this time that he told her that he was the Pope, that Phoebe was possessed by demons, and that he had been pouring sea salt on the outside of the doors to keep the demons from entering the residence and Phoebe's bedroom. And this was something that was noted by the police after Phoebe's death, too. So we have, going back to the chart, telling John that he's the Pope is called a grandiose delusion, thinking he is some amazing figure. This is way beyond an inflated self-esteem. He thinks he's a Pope. This is a grandiose delusion. We have, again, the possession of demons, which is a paranoid delusion, and along with that, taking steps to ward off the demons that he believes that are after him or in him and Phoebe.
Doctor, I've heard a term mood congruent and mood incongruent. Am I correct in those? Those are medical terms?
Well, it's in the DSM-5. It's a specifier for when you diagnose bipolar disorder with psychotic features. When you diagnose with psychotic features, it can be mood congruent or mood incongruent features. A mood congruent feature would be like a grandiose delusion. So we're talking about a manic episode. An individual has issues with grandiosity, with feeling an inflated self-esteem. So that would be a delusion which sort of goes along with a symptom of bipolar disorder. A paranoid delusion is more of a mood incongruent feature because it's not a typical characteristic that one sees when somebody is experiencing a bipolar disorder. It's not related to like a grandiosity, is what you see more with bipolar disorder. And the way that the DSM-5 works is that they have both mood congruent and mood incongruent psychotic features. You diagnose them with the mood incongruent features. So they also had contact with his biological mother. And what she reported to law enforcement was that in December, John was throwing up and having heart palpitations. So this kind of corroborates that he's experiencing increased stress during December, as we saw in the hospital record where he was experiencing symptoms of a panic disorder, having a heart palpitations. The anxiety is so bad that he's throwing up.
This December that you're talking about now, and his heart palpitations, this corresponds to that time he went to the hospital in the middle of the night?
Along the same time, yes.
Okay, same month.
Same month, yes. And then in January, she reported that in January that John believed her apartment had Chinese drywall, and that he said the walls were turning black. The thing is that she looked at the walls and they were not turning back. This would be a visual hallucination. He thought that this black Chinese drywall was doing something to Phoebe, that it was making her eyes look funny. And he said that Phoebe was possessed. And she looked at her eyes and didn't see anything wrong with her eyes at the time. And she noted that John had not been taking his medications at this time.
So John told Michelle JONCHUCK that Phoebe was possessed.
Yes.
And that's not the only person he had told that to, correct?
No. They also spoke, law enforcement also spoke with Nomi Bresnahan, and she reported that John was texting her about praying, about reading the Bible, and he also about putting sea salt around the house. So he also communicated with her about this religious preoccupation that he has, this religiosity that he was experiencing, and also the steps that he was taking to try to protect him as well as Phoebe. And then we get to January 2nd, 2015. He wrote his attorney, Genevieve Torres, in order to start working on the case. Because at this point, there was greater animosity between Michelle Kerr and John, and they had been each looking to seek custody of Phoebe. And so what he writes here, and may be a little difficult to read. Thanks, we really need to do the non-removal because after doing visitation up there, I had concerns and called CPI, and Michelle said that she passed her drug test and was going to file false report and tried to get the retraining order, one for me and one for Phoebe, and it got denied and was recommended I do that by the investigator. They had knives and live ammos, and she looked under the influence, and the guy she is with verbally scolded her harshly in front of me and has been arrested for DV on her twice at the 2118 Delightful Drive, Ruskin, Florida 33570. His name is funny, but it's real Guy Kisser. Is there anyone at your office to sign the retainer? I told Michelle I was going to when you got back, and she stopped harassing us, but this is serious, Missy. And if you recall, you can't know exactly, you can't see disordered thinking. We can only see it through the way somebody speaks or somebody writes. And this seems to be sort of pressured speech. It's just one word after the other with many, many different ideas. There's one stop in this whole email. Disorganized is an indication of disorganized thinking, disorganized speaking, disorganized writing.
Now, do we see evidence of tangential and circumstantial?
It would be more circumstantial. It's kind of stays on track. It goes a little bit off, but it doesn't go to overt topic to a totally different topic to a totally different topic. It would be more circumstantial.
And it is evidence of disorganized thinking?
Thinking and writing. January 3rd, his uncle, Brian Morris, starts getting texts from John. It was indicated that they had not had contact for quite some time, I believe a year or two. And so sort of out of the blue, his uncle Brian is getting text messages. And they say a lot as far as John's mind frame at the time, his mental state at the time. John writes, can you all meet me at my mom's? There is Chinese drywall stuff and food that is canned, has been spoiled, and that is still good for 2 years. I think it has been making her and the baby sick, and he sent a photo of an empty bowl. I started pulling out to dry and get her organized in the pantries, and that is what was found, and the canned fruits have been smelling like rotten eggs. So there's a number of things in these texts. There is the corroboration of that he's experiencing these visual hallucinations, this Chinese drywall, this delusion that he's having. And now there's indications that he's having olfactory types of hallucinations. He's smelling things, rotten eggs. He's indicating that it's making her and the baby sick. Sending a photo of an empty bowl, not really sure what that's about. That can very much be a disorganized behavior. There's also not a cohesiveness to the thoughts that he's expressing. Mr. Morris writes back, who is he? He doesn't even know who's writing these text messages. And John says, this is Johnny. She is really concerned, uncles. He continues. Brian writes back, it will be a while before we can come. We have a plumber here fixing a faucet and a guy on the way about buying the koi. Okay, no problemo. I knew something was fishy here. LOL. Thank you very much. So we go from being very, very concerned about Chinese drywall, about his mother and Phoebe getting sick. This is causing a great deal of anxiety. A couple of texts further down, it's LOL. If it wasn't writing, if he was talking, this would be called inappropriate laughter. But what we have is the text message. It's inappropriate. It's not congruent. You have disorganized behavior. It doesn't fit. He continues, we have found from the neighbors that they never pulled permits either, and when sitting down, using the lightheaded, and my nose started bleeding, and Phoebe only has shown signs of panic attacks, here waking up wailing. Now we're sort of going from topic, now we're getting into tangential thinking. We're going from topic to topic. There is no train or straight train of thought. His thinking is grossly disorganized, and that is reflected in his writing. The next day, he writes additional text messages to his uncle. He writes, please don't give up on me. I understand that everyone was trying to show me tough love, and I am almost ready. What it's like to be normal again, if only I had listened to you guys years ago, I probably would be a doctor by now, LOL. Just wanted to say I love you all. Just got home from work. Hope all is well and you have a wonderful evening. Every day I am one step closer. I fell like $1,000,000. Thank you for everything. I want to share my story soon. There's a lot in here as well. In this line of text messages, it's almost that he's euphoric. He's very cheerful. He's optimistic. He's upbeat. In comparison to one day before, where he's very, very fearful and anxious about Chinese drywall, poisonous food, people getting sick. It's a very big mood swing from the day before. He also talks about LOL. Again, we have disorganized behavior. It's not clear what he's laughing about, but it's certainly a big, big change from the day before. The next day he writes some more text messages to Brian Morris. He writes, Doug is my father. I found the key to unlock my gift, and I'm going to do everything I can to get him out of there. I forgive you all. These text messages indicate very, very disorganized thinking. And as well as certain delusions. I asked him about these text messages. I said, what did you mean, Doug is my father? And he said, the only person I can think of in my life is a Doug Kelsey, who's a cousin, a maternal cousin of his. And he said, I don't know why I would write that. I asked him about the line, I found the key to unlock my gift. And what he said what that was about was his gift was his ability to read minds, which would be a delusion.
Two delusions?
Well, one is just disorganized thinking.
Oh, this one?
Yes, that the ability to read minds would be a delusion. And I'm going to do everything I can to get him out of there. He didn't know what he meant when he wrote that or what he meant when he wrote, "I forgive you all." The same day, well, I guess, not sure when the text messages were from Brian to Brian Mars that day, but also that day he wrote to Tasha Clare. The same day he's writing about Doug is my father, and I've found the key to my gift. I found the key to unlock my gift. He also wrote his friend Tasha Clare.
What time does he write her?
This is at 12:41 a.m.
So, well, most people would consider the middle of the night.
Most people. And I'm not going to read this whole email to you, but basically what it's about, there's some running themes to it. It's, first of all, he's apologizing for bad behaviors that he has shown them in the past. He thanks them for their friendship and their support. And he also talks about how he's getting on with his life. He's moving forward in his life. So we went from very bizarre types of text messages to now a very coherent, almost, message. If it wasn't for the change in moods, this would be a great email.
All right, so let me ask you a question. I've got this piece of paper here, which is the same as your PowerPoint. This email we know is from 12:41 a.m. on January 5th. Now, we don't have a time for the text messages between John and Brian Morris, correct?
If you give me a second, I can find that.
But we have a date, don't we?
Yes.
So in any event, no matter what time they are, the same day he's writing this is also the same day he's saying, Doug is my father?
Yes.
Same day he's saying, I found the key to unlock my gift?
Yes.
And I am going to do everything I can to get him out of there? Same day he writes both, all this information.
Yes. And also the same day, this is about 2 hours and 20 minutes later, he wakes up his mother, Michelle JONCHUCK. And he makes some bizarre statements to her.
Okay, let me stop you because we didn't introduce. 2 hours, this is at 3 a.m. John and Michelle. The other one, we knew the time was 12:41. That was John to Natasha, or Tasha?
Tasha, yes.
Okay. So that when you say 2 hours later, this is what happens 2 hours after the email to Tasha.
Yes. He said to her that he was her mother, his mother's mother. And he said he, being her mother, did not molest her, his mother, that it was actually her father and grandfather who molested her. This is 3 o'clock in the morning. She sounds asleep, and John is saying these things to her. He then called her a piece of shit, and that he was tired of her keeping Phoebe away from him. I believe he said something like, I'm going to fuck up your life. And he took Phoebe from the apartment that morning, and he went to his father's. So, in going back to that last slide, the idea that he has these statements that he is her mother, I would put under a category of delusions.
Not sure I've been keeping up with everyone.
The next The next day, he goes to see attorney Genevieve Torres to discuss the issues with regards to Phoebe. I was able to interview and speak with attorney Torres. She described John as being excitable, loud, effeminate, hyper, and laughing a lot. These are all symptoms that would be characteristic of somebody in a manic episode. He was seeking sole custody of Phoebe. She did not see any indications of drug or alcohol influence. And so they were able to have a coherent conversation about getting the custody of Phoebe. Although she did notice that he seemed to be loud, hyper, showing those symptoms. On January 6th as well, he had contact with Melody Dishman, which was a childhood friend of his.
How do you know about this?
There were indications in police reports, and I recently was able to read a deposition in which she talked about her contacts with John around this time. And what she reported was that
Hold on a second.
ask you real quick, go back to, not on the screen, just to go back to your testimony. Tasha Claire was what time of day?
I believe it was 12. It was 12:41 a.m.
What time was 12:41 a.m.? Michelle Jonchuk recounts this conversation at 3 a.m.
Correct.
You mentioned that you also had text messages from Mr. Jonchuk to his uncle. Is there do you know off the top of your head what time those were?
Well, I checked the police report, and at least the first text message was at 7:05 a.m. So it was a little out of order. It doesn't change the fact that he's going from one mood, very, very dramatic mood swings, but the text started coming at 7:05 a.m.
A.m.
Yes.
Up at 12:40, up at 3 a.m., up at 7 a.m.?
Correct.
And when we stopped, we were talking about Melody Dishman.
Yes. So law enforcement also spoke with Melody Dishman and said that John had told her on the 6th. It was both phone calls and text messages. So these messages, it's not clear what was phone calls and what was text messages, but it was communication that the two of them had together. And she said that John told her that she was a parish of God, that she was the Pope, that she had to walk on water. Again, this was through calls and texts. He also communicated that he wanted to kill Melody because she was possessed by a demon. And she reported that he was claiming that he was God and wanted to kill Melody because she was a demon now. And
It was all one day?
it's all one day.
So she goes from a parish of God to the Pope to being a demon?
Yes. And so we have delusions, we have grandiose delusions, we have paranoid delusions. But there was also something else that was significant in the deposition. In the police report, she made the statement that if he ever, John Jr. told her that if he ever did anything to get into big trouble,
Just the SCP allowed to finish the statement that you were making.
Yes, he was responding to your question.
Please repeat the question.
I believe the question was, Melody went from God to the Pope to being a demon all in one day?
Yes.
I understand that was the
I
question.
understand, move on.
All right, your next slide, Doctor, involves who?
This was a conversation on January 7th at 10 o'clock between John Chuck Jr. and his attorney Torres, and this was in her office.
All right, and what happened?
What she reported, first of all, was that John arrived at the office wearing pajamas, which she deemed to be quite bizarre, and this would go under grossly disorganized behavior. He made a comment about Ms. Torres just coming back from Babylon. I think she had been on vacation, but certainly not from Babylon, and so she thought this was quite odd.
That's a delusion?
I don't know if it's a delusion or whether it's just disorganized thinking. He said when Phoebe touched the Bible, he's talking to her about this Swedish Bible, that she would start chanting or speaking in tongues. And this would be auditory hallucinations. He insisted that she, Ms. Torres, was Saint Genevieve. He was insisting that this is who she was. And she said she wasn't Saint Genevieve. When she said that she wasn't Saint Genevieve, then he said, then you must be God. And then she said she wasn't God. So then he said, well, then he was God.
So in that one, it went from her being Saint Genevieve to God to him being God?
Yes.
All in the same conversation?
Yes. So we have delusions, and we have delusions that she is the saint and God, and delusions that he is God. She reported that he asked her several times to read the Swedish Bible that he brought. She has an accent, and so that was an indication that he thought that she could read the Swedish Bible, and she said she could not read it. But then he went on to say it wasn't just because she had an accent, it was because that she is the creator, and so she speaks all languages. He became frustrated with her, saying when she said that she could not read the Swedish Bible, and said it just didn't make sense. She is the creator, she speaks all languages, it doesn't make sense that she can't read this Bible. And he was acting despondent or sad, as well as strange. He wanted her to file a paternity suit against Phoebe's mother. He told her not to file the paperwork because it doesn't matter anymore, or none of this is going to matter anymore, which scared her. He asked to leave Phoebe with her while he went to see the pastor, which she thought, too, was quite odd. So we have a lot of delusional thinking at that point. He then goes to see Father Swengros at the St. Paul's Catholic Church. This is approximately around 11:20 a.m. And Father Swengros reported that John claimed to be the Pope. Grandiose delusion. John wanted to have an exorcism performed on him because he told him he was possessed. So here we have more paranoid delusions, and now he's talking about an exorcism.
Where did that information come from?
That was from Father Swingros. It was in police reports.
Okay.
It was either police reports or his deposition, I'm not positive, but it was from him. He wanted to get baptized immediately, and we're going to see in other slides, there's this real focus on getting baptized. And I asked him about that, and he said that he thought by getting baptized, not only would that take care of the demons, but that it also would take care of the voices that he was hearing. And he wasn't able to get baptized immediately. He was told that there's a whole process you have to go through, studies and learning, and you can't just get baptized immediately. He also noted that John was all over the place and having difficulty focusing. And this is symptomatic of the disorganized thinking. He can't keep his train of thought. His thoughts are all over the place. Having very distracted, can't focus. He also reported that John expressed paranoia, that everybody was out to get him. And this would be a delusion. And what he stated was it was obvious that John had some mental issues. Attorney Torres was so concerned about John's behavior that when he left, she called 911. She called the police, and she was able to tell him where he was going to be. And so officers Halbert, Calabero, and Rizzo interviewed John while he was at the church.
Did you review their reports?
Yes.
Okay. Carry on.
He reported that God spoke to him and gave him newfound clarity in his life, and they noted too that he's carrying around his Bible. Again, wherever he's going, he's carrying around this Bible. He reported that his lawyer was God because she decides what happens and does not happen in his custody case, which isn't true. That would be the judge. He also reported that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder several years back and was told by a USF doctor that he didn't have the disorder. That's not the way bipolar disorder works. You don't have it one day and not have it the other day. Bipolar disorder is a very, very severe disorder. At times you might be in a manic episode. At times you can be in a depressive episode. At times you may not have any significant symptoms, but you always have the disorder. So that didn't make sense. He told him that he was not upset by the custody dispute and that he thinks he will win without his lawyer's assistance. So he's talking about the custody case. He's talking about now he thinks he can do it by himself, which I would believe is a grandiose delusion. And they indicated that they did not see any indication of alcohol or drug involvement, intoxication. At 12 o'clock, he goes to St. Lawrence Catholic Church and he meets with Reverend Cesar Patella. And Reverend Patella reported that John was worried about the devil, that he could see the devil everywhere. That would be a visual hallucination. He worried about what was happening in the world. Reverend Patella told John that he should go back to his doctor who prescribed him his medications, appearing to see that John was experiencing some severe mental disorders at the time. He referred John to another church. go back for a second. As I asked John about this visit, and he talked about how he was talking to Reverend Patella about exorcisms, and Reverend Patella gave him that wasn't something he did, and he gave him a phone number of another church to call up to get more information about exorcism. John said he called that number, but nobody responded. So at 1 o'clock, he goes back to Father Swingross at St. Paul's Catholic Church, and again reported that he wanted to be baptized right away, but was more agitated and more insistent about being baptized. And again, from what John told me, this was a way to get the demons away. His stepmother, Mickey Jonchuk, reported that she went with John to the priest, that John wanted her to go to see the priest because he wanted to prove to the priest that she was still alive. There had been no indication from the records that I reviewed that there was any doubt that she was alive, but he wanted to prove that she was.
Is that disorganized?
Disorganized thinking, yes. At around 2 o'clock, he has contact with Valerie Mallory at a different church, the Lake Magdalene Church, and she reported that John said to her that he was related to the Pope. She also noted that he was carrying around this large brown Bible. He was rambling about God. So here we have that disorganized thinking that speaks, that rambling is a type of disorganized. You see the disorganized thinking. And he wanted to be baptized immediately. He is going to all these different churches to find some place to get baptized.
And this is all occurring on the day of January 7th.
Yes.
What happens next on January 7th?
The next record that I have is approximately 6:30 to 8 o'clock. Apparently he went home after that last church visit and went home. At approximately 6:30, Michelle Jonchuk comes over to his father's and his stepmother's to pick up Phoebe. Apparently, after the time that John said that I'm going to fuck up your life and that you're taking my daughter away from him, they had phone conversations and they agreed for her to come over and pick up Phoebe. Michelle Jonchuk noted that Phoebe has this gold chain with a big cross around her neck. And this was a cross that John had received when he was 8 years old. She noted that he had been sleeping and the Bible was underneath his pillow. He was sleeping, I believe, on the sofa. And when it was time to go, Phoebe indicated that she wanted to stay with John.
Okay, so Michelle comes to pick up Phoebe, and this is arranged through phone calls between John and Michelle?
Yes.
And that arrangement is made some 6 hours before Phoebe's death?
Yes.
And it was Phoebe that didn't want to go?
Yes. According to Michelle Jonchuk. So, a little after Michelle Jonchuk leaves, John Jonchuk writes an email to Genevieve Torres, his attorney, saying, my mom will be by to drop off the last $100 before you all close. LOL, ha ha. Thanks for everything, and we are a part of St. Paul's now. So again, there's that inappropriate laughter, that disorganized behavior.
So at 8:27 p.m., he says, we'll drop off the last $100 before you all close?
Yes.
So,
They were already closed.
and he says he's part of the St. Paul now.
Yes.
Neither one of those are true, are they? Didn't St. Paul's refuse to baptize him?
Well, they refused, and he didn't join from my knowledge. Between 9 and 9:30 p.m. of January 7th, he has contact with Nomi Bresnahan. He sent her text messages with scripture, biblical scripture, and she indicated this wasn't like him. He wasn't a very religious person, and this was out of the norm for her for what she knows of John and her experience with John.
Did she describe her relationship with John?
They were friends.
Been a relationship type of friends or just friends?
Just friends. They were never in a relationship.
What's the next thing he tells you?
So after texting her these messages, he goes to her home and is texting her outside the home that they were meant to be together for the rest of their lives. And was just noted that was odd because they had never had that type of close relationship. They were just friends. At 10:27 the same night, he emails attorney Genevieve Torres, "I will be there in the morning to give you the last $100. We'll be there, thanks, at 9:30 a.m.
So this is different than just 2 hours earlier.
It was different in 2 hours because he had first talked about his mother bringing over the $100.
That before she closed.
After she closed.
After she closed,
Yes.
but he says before you close.
Right.
Now he says he's bringing it over, but he's bringing it over the next day,
Next
right?
day.
Okay. What's that? Just one of these. Or is it any of these, that email?
Well, again, there's some disorganization there. He's changing his mind. First his mother is bringing, then he's bringing. It's not, that in and of itself is not particularly psychotic, although there is some disorganization there.
No check.
No check. He then, at around 10:30, calls up his mother and asks her to come over to pick up Phoebe. And Michelle says that due to Phoebe being asleep and it being cold and windy, for John to take her to school, and then she would pick Phoebe up from school. So he went from before, a couple of days before, where he was saying some nasty things to his mother about taking Phoebe and that he's going to do horrible things to her. Now they seem to be getting along. He's fine with his mother taking care of Phoebe.
Do we have a time for the contact with Noemi?
It was between 9 and 9:30.
All right, and then, so then an hour later, according to Michelle JONCHUCK, she's talking to him on the phone and Phoebe's already asleep.
So the next record we have is at 11:55 p.m. of January 7th. And in this we see the PT Cruiser running a red light, John driving very erratically. Let's see if this works. Yep.
Just press it once. There you go.
Okay. So I think what is important to make a comment about is just because somebody is psychotic doesn't mean they can't take care of themselves generally. It doesn't mean they can't drive a car. It doesn't mean that they can't feed themselves, bathe themselves. But I think this is a good example where John is driving a car, but in a grossly disorganized way. He's running red lights, he's speeding through red lights, he's acting very erratic. It's not where somebody is just drooling and not able to do anything. They can go through the motions. What is distorted, what is disturbed is the thinking, the irrational, illogical thinking, the psychotic thinking. And then we come to 12:07 on January 8th, 2015. And we have reports from Officer Vickers. And he reports that a car passed him going approximately 100 miles an hour, driving recklessly.
And that is at 12:07.
12:07.
That video you just showed us was 11:55
Correct.
in Tampa.
Yes.
So this is 12:07 south of St. Pete.
Yes. It was on 275 in St. Pete.
South St. Pete.
South. And it's important to keep in mind, Officer Vickers was in a marked patrol car, and John sped right past this patrol car and almost causes an accident, not only with Officer Vickers in his patrol car, but also with another car. He's driving very recklessly, speeding, and not paying attention to what's in front of him. Most people, if they see a marked police car, is not going to go speeding past that police car. Grossly disorganized, yes. Officer Vickers follows him at a distance, and he noted that the car applied brakes heavily near the Pinellas Bayway exit, creating this large cloud of smoke. And then the car takes off again, but not at 100 miles an hour at an appropriate speed. And he continues to follow the car at a distance and is getting ready to pull over John. He does not have his lights on at this time, and he notices that the car pulls over into the emergency lane of the Dick Meisner Bridge. John exited the driver's side door. He noted that John was wearing a sweatshirt and red and yellow pajamas, so very inappropriate dress for a cold and windy night. Grossly disorganized behavior. He notes that as John is walking, coming out of the car, he's holding this large book. That large book was that Swedish Bible. Officer Vickers reported that he had his gun in a low ready position and ordered John back into his vehicle. The way that Officer Vickers reported it was that he pulled behind John, and there was between a car and a car and a half distance between their two vehicles. And John walks in between the vehicles, so quite close to Officer Vickers, ignoring the order to get back into his car. At this point, John yells, "You have no free will." I asked John what he meant by that, and what he reported was he did not know. He took Phoebe from the rear seat of the car, lifted her over the wall, and released her. The way that he reported, he had her and dropped her over the side. When I asked John about it, he reported that he held Phoebe by her foot when he dropped her, which does not go along with the reports of Officer Vickers. John gets back into the car, reportedly by Officer Vickers in a calm manner, and proceeds on. In addition to there being discrepancies of how Phoebe was dropped, there's also discrepancies in what happens after he gets back in the car. According to officer reports, John proceeds across the Skyway Bridge. He goes north on 75. Police interact with him. He makes a U-turn, travels south on 75 in the northbound lanes. In asking John, he has a very, very vague memory of what happened afterwards. He said he sort of remembers going towards the bridge, but being blocked off. And so turning, making a U-turn and heading back towards where he dropped Phoebe, which just doesn't go with many of the officer reports. So he has a very distorted recall of what occurred, not only during but also afterwards. The next thing that happens is he's stopped by police, and he's dragged through the window, and he goes into the patrol car where he speaks with Sergeant Hubble. And the interactions with Sergeant Hubble are quite bizarre. She asked him his name, and he replied, "My name is God, and you shall address me as such. Terry, I command you to take me to the city of Babylon now."
Is that the first time we've heard about Babylon that day?
No, he had also mentioned that to Attorney Torres. And just to go back a moment, in talking about being on the bridge with Phoebe, he reported that he could not recall what exactly he was thinking at that time. He had been having these thoughts about possession, that he and Phoebe were possessed, that both of them needed to die in order to save the world. He also talked about having thoughts that the Ice Age was coming and that he needed to travel south in order to avoid the Ice Age. So all of that delusional. On top of the bridge, he also talked about that he thought he was God at that time. So here he's saying to Sergeant Hubble, "My name is God, and you shall address me as such, and I command you to take me to the city of Babylon." He also referred to himself, to Sergeant Hubble, as the fallen angel Michael. It was noted that he was making incoherent statements the entirety of my conversation with him, and here's that disorganized thinking, disorganized speech. To the point, what he is saying cannot be made out the words in which he is saying it. It's gotten that disorganized. And during this whole time, he's asking for his Bible. The Bible seemed to be the most important thing to him. Other officers corroborated what Sergeant Hubble reported, that John was screaming that he wanted, not just saying that he wanted his Bible, he's screaming that he wanted his Bible. Officer Kuiman said that he was making incoherent statements. So it wasn't just Sergeant Hubble reporting these things, but also other officers. No statements were made regarding Phoebe. John was then taken to the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, where he was spoken to by a detective, Detective Huff. And I'm just going to play a few very quick clips from this time in the interview room.
I need somebody to obviously help me because I think that there's something bigger going on. Like, that's beyond me, beyond everything, you know?
So at this point, he seems to be in between reality and not reality. He realizes that something's wrong. He's not really sure what is wrong, but he knows something is wrong.
Will you bring me my Bible?
He says, will you bring me my Bible? So even at this point, he is focused, stuck on this Bible of his, the importance of this Bible.
Like, it's almost like I'm not being weird. It's like, this is like a conspiracy. I went looking for answers. I've always had problems growing up, like, wondering who I was and how and what my purpose was. And ever since yesterday and a couple days before,
like what? You know, problems? How do you think you're different?
well, it's like, I don't know, like when I went to the church
What
today,
church?
St. Paul's Catholic Church, and I spoke to Father Bill. He told me that I wasn't going to be ready this Easter, but next Easter, and that I was the Pope. That Francis or whatever is not like,
He's not the real Pope?
yes. And my grandma's name, and I do have Greek heritage, believe it or not. My grandma's maiden name is Vladimir. And it's always been weird, and I've had people coming up to me recently and asking me what my name is, and I've only been able to say John. Prior to this, weeks prior to this, like, and they would ask me what my last name is, and I would just say John.
Like you just physically couldn't say your last name, or
It just-
JONCHUCK, or it's just John?
It was just John for some reason, and it's like I really had to kind of think about it for a minute.
And that's just been going on this past week?
Yeah.
How about the Island Crew? You like working there? You said it's a Jamaican restaurant?
I kind of felt uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable? How so? I mean, it's a job.
How do you know all this stuff?
You told me when I was asking you what your name was and what you said that you worked at Island Crew, and that it was a Jamaican restaurant, or it was like a cafe. That's how you put it.
There is a great deal in this clip. There are signs of paranoia when he talks about, people are looking at me strange. There's the signs of grandiosity where he talks again about being Pope. You can also see the distracted thinking, the disorganized thinking and speech, where he's going from topic to topic to topic, to talking about his grandmother, to talking about not being able to say his name, and it's all very, very disorganized. And I think another thing which you can see in the video is he's just been pulled out of the window of his PT Cruiser. Yet there's very little expression on his face. This would go along with negative symptoms. You would expect somebody in this type of situation to have more or show more emotion.
Like, everybody just kept staring at me when I was doing a hell of a job, but
He was at his job at Island Crew for a day, and he's talking about people looking at him funny. clear sign paranoia.
Is Phoebe okay?
Phoebe? Who's that?
Phoebe was my daughter. Phoebe J. Jonchuk. Is she okay?
At this point, it's time in the interview room. I don't have the direct timestamp, but it had been quite a while. He seems at this point to have some type of appreciation that something has happened to his daughter. He asked how she is, but he also speaks about her in the past tense. And then he is taken by Officer Carter to the Pinellas County Jail, and during that trip he makes some odd and bizarre statements. He reported that he dropped Phoebe into the water and did not throw her. Like this made a distinction. For some reason, it was important for him to make this distinction to Officer Carter that Phoebe was dropped rather than was thrown. But it doesn't make rational sense. And I don't think I used these words before, but when we're talking about psychosis, we're talking about somebody who's not in touch with reality, somebody who is having delusions, somebody who's having hallucinations. They are not in touch with the reality before them. He noted that John didn't appear upset or remorseful. Again, the negative symptoms, he's not showing any emotion at all. It's a very flat demeanor, a very non-expressive demeanor.
He told Officer Carter.
He stated that you don't know what I've been going through.
What's that indicate to you?
Well, what it indicates is, to me, it was very reflective of what he was saying to Detective Huff. He's been going from church to church to church. It's possible that it also indicates that he's been going through everything that he's been talking about with other people as far as demonic possession and all of that. Don't really know, but he's certainly talking about there's a lot going on in his life.
Now, do you have two more examples from Officer Carter of delusions?
Well, he also asked John what he wanted to know what he did wrong. And asking what he did wrong, apparently did not know the wrongfulness of, or at least a strong indicator that he didn't know the wrongfulness of his behaviors.
Now that's important, and we're going to get to that soon, aren't we? The wrongfulness of
Absolutely.
All right. What are the next two things he told us?
He also said to Officer Carter he wanted to be taken to Babylon.
So that particular delusion has occurred 3 times now in this 24-hour, less
Well,
than
that
24-hour period.
religious preoccupation, this focus of Babylon, of going to Babylon, not only is there that delusional, disorganized thinking, but also, too, it's out of touch with reality, especially for what he just did, that he's going to be taken somewhere besides jail, that the officer is just going to take him to Babylon, which is an irrational type of statement.
Or he may ask to be taken to...
Tampa Airport. He also asked Officer Carter to take him to the airport. Like, with what he just did, it would be okay to be taken to that Officer Carter would just drive him to the airport. Another indicator that he's not aware of the wrongfulness of what he just did.
All right, quick, Coach.
Yes.
Were you able to review a court appearance that Mr. JONCHUCK made on January 8th?
Yes.
All right, and this is the same day he's arrested, correct?
Yes.
What did Mr. JONCHUCK say on that day?
Well, he was speaking to the judge, and John expressed that he didn't want an attorney, that he wanted to leave things in the hands of God. And so, continued religious preoccupation and delusions that, well, let's go with religious preoccupation. After the judge promoted the idea of an attorney, John initially agreed, but said only if the attorney is pure and good and not evil. He then reverted to not wanting an attorney and expressing that he wanted the matter left in the hands of God.
All right, and then, so then that is that was a court appearance, you said, where he's talking to a judge.
He's talking to the judge, and he's saying that has very mixed feelings about having an attorney and feels he'll be better served in the hands of God.
All right, and then, so then now that you have, as part of your evaluation, also observed some of his records while he was in the Pinellas County Jail?
In doing an insanity evaluation, it's very important to look at the individual's behaviors and statements before, as much as you can get at the time, as well as what their behaviors and statements are right after. Did it end right after the offense, or is it a disorder that just keeps going on and on and on? And so it's important to review what one can in regards to the mental status, the mental state of the individual as soon after the offense. And so we're able to review Pinellas County Jail records. This is the record itself. And in this record, some of the comments included, when he was asked if he knows why he's in jail, he replied, "Because I killed my daughter. And the reason why I killed her is because I am impotent." And so here, there seems to be some realization of what he did. The reason, though, is so distorted and disorganized. It's so out of touch with reality. Also in this note, he says, "I want to redeem myself. My real name is John the Baptist. Even the name given to me was JONCHUCK." So we continue with these grandiose delusions. Now he's John the Baptist. He's God, he's the fallen angel Michael, he's John the Baptist. And also this religious preoccupation. Everything is circled around some aspect of religion, demons, God. Another note that day, this is at 5:16 p.m. Okay, so this is also in the same note. It was written that initially he denied previous psych contact and later said, "I don't need to take any psych meds. They do not work for me. I just need God." So he's, in this statement, he's downplaying his psychological issues and focusing in on what will cure him, what will be important to him is God. God is what he needs. Dr. Hernandez, who wrote this note, diagnosed John with psychosis NOS. NOS means not otherwise specified. And this was back in the last edition of the DSM-4TR. Now they don't have an NOS. But what it was a catch-all. It was basically stating, this guy is psychotic, he has psychosis, I'm just not sure what specific diagnosis of psychosis he is. So he's just giving him a general psychotic type of diagnosis.
And he was able to make that diagnosis 16 hours after Mr. JONCHUCK's in jail, or very soon after he gets to jail?
Less than, yes.
Okay.
The RO means rule out, so he's considering, maybe the specific kind of psychosis that he's experiencing is chronic paranoid schizophrenia. Dr. Hernandez also noted that John's speech was irrelevant at times, His affect was labile, judgment very poor, insight poor, thought content reveals paranoia. So the speech is irrelevant, goes back to the disorganized thinking. Here doesn't have that flat affect. Now his demeanor is all over the place. So an example would be somebody who displays anger and then is laughing and then have no emotion. That's a labile affect. And it's clear, judgment poor, insight poor, content reveals paranoia, which would be delusional. The next record, I'm not showing you every record that there was, I'm just showing you highlights. The next record that I have is January 14th at 7 p.m. And what was in this note was patient remains showing unpredictable, disorganized behavior, singing at times. So and that's clear, disorganized behavior. It's written right there. Next note, January 17th.
These are from the jail.
This is from the jail. All of these records are from the jail. He denies that he is thinking about suicide. He's stating the reason he would want to remain alive was for my child. And we'll see this when I get into notes from the state hospital. John seems to vacillate, go back and forth between acknowledging that Phoebe is dead to denying that he is dead, or not accepting or not realizing that she is dead. When asked how many children he had, he replied just one. Just the one. A note from the 18th, January 18th. A flat, odd effect. So here he has no expression, although it reports that he smiled and laughed inappropriately. Disorganized behavior throughout the session. So actually it sounds more of a labile mood. He stated that he no longer felt like talking to the chaplain and said, "Think this is beyond that, don't you? I mean, I went to a church to search for answers, and that's when all this happened. I spoke to Father Bill, and he tried to take my Bible. It was my stepmother's. She told me she thought I needed it more than her, so I wouldn't give it to him." Continually focused on this Bible, and the thinking processes are disorganized. January 18th, there's the note he then shared. This is the same note, actually. He then shared that some guy came into his room last night and told him he was a mermaid. And he proceeded to giggle and talk to himself while this writer was seeing other inmates. So it was sort of like the experience that I had when I saw him. He was mumbling to himself, talking to himself.
So is this a delusion or a hallucination or both?
Well, the idea that the mermaid would be possibly a hallucination, possibly a delusion. It was not specific as whether he says that it would be more of a delusion. He says he didn't see the mermaid. Giggling and talking to himself. Again, that can be indicative of responding to internal stimuli, responding to voices. He was noted to be hyperactive. The speech was pressured, so he's having the racing thoughts, and it's coming out in pressured speech. His expression, his affect is inappropriate. Reasoning, impulse control, judgment, insight, all poor. Thought processes, tangential, circumstantial, concrete. So again, the disorganized thinking and speech. It was also noted that he's having auditory and visual hallucinations. The thought content reveals paranoia and delusions. And so the symptoms that he was experiencing prior to the death of Phoebe, he's experiencing weeks after. Record on the 23rd says that he remains on suicidal risk status and is very paranoid, delusional. States he's been refusing his blood pressure medications and believe it is not the meds for blood pressure, but something else. And what he believed was the jail staff was trying to harm him, and relates to the paranoia that is also indicated in this note. On January 30th, this was the same day that I saw him, he was diagnosed with ruled out schizoaffective disorder. So schizoaffective disorder is a combination of psychotic symptoms and either bipolar symptoms or depressive symptoms. It's not clearly stated in the record, but it is a combination of the psychotic symptoms and some type of mood disorder. On February 3rd, the note is, he told the deputy, "I do not like you because you are Deputy Huff, the one who shot my kid." So first of all, Deputy Huff works in Manatee. He was not in the jail. And then he has an understanding that his daughter was harmed, but she wasn't harmed by a gunshot. So again, very disorganized thinking. He remains unpredictable, disorganized behavior. From the jail, Mr. JONCHUCK went to the state hospital. The name of the state hospital that he went to was the North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center. And while at the state hospital, the symptoms continued. They reported that he was experiencing delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, disorganized thinking, thought reading, that he was able to read other people's minds, thought broadcasting, that people could read his minds or know what he was thinking. He was agitated, depressed, anxious. He expressed suicidal ideation. And what they also indicated in their notes is that he vacillates, he changes between the acknowledgement that Phoebe died and denying that she died.
So they see, this is at the intake?
It was through many, many different, there were numerous records that I reviewed from the state hospital, so I just sort of summarized them.
All right, and so what they see mimics what we see on this board.
What was seen before Phoebe's death and at the time of, and you see it afterwards as well.
You learn anything else from the North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center?
That's a pretty broad summary of the records that I reviewed from there. Oh, also, the diagnosis that they gave him at the state hospital, they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. They diagnosed him with schizoaffective disorder, both types, the depressive type and the bipolar type. So the diagnosis changed a little bit over time, but it's very, very similar. In all three of these disorders, he's experiencing these psychotic symptoms. With the schizoaffective disorder, they're also throwing in a mood component, where they also see bipolar symptoms or they see depressive symptoms. But in all three of these diagnoses, they're very similar. He has those psychotic symptoms.
And that's the mood component that you had talked about in your diagnosis?
Yes. And the thing is that from my review, I did not evaluate him prior to the death of Phoebe. So I'm doing my diagnosis through the records that I'm reviewing and the reports that I am reviewing and my interview with him. And so I'm making a diagnosis what he was at the time. At the time, I saw him experiencing psychotic symptoms while he was experiencing manic episodes. What the schizoaffective disorder is, that he experiences psychotic symptoms, not necessarily, not during, at times, while he has a mood disorder. He has psychotic symptoms separate from a mood disorder. At this point, I would diagnose him with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type 2, because he has shown that since being in the state hospital. It's in the DSM-5, it even indicates that it's difficult to make that discrimination between or that differential diagnosis between bipolar disorder with psychotic features versus schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, because they all have the same symptoms. It's just the timing of the symptoms. And in fact, they note in the manual that individuals often go from bipolar disorder with psychotic features to schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and vice versa. They have prescribed him numerous medications: Haldol, Seroquel, clonazepam, Neurontin, Wellbutrin, Vesperil, Klonopin, Ativan, and Cogentin. These medications are to address psychotic symptoms, bipolar symptoms, anxiety symptoms, depressive symptoms, and Cogentin is to help with the side effects of these medications.
Doctor, you have now told us, as far as, well, let me jump now to a question for you, and you have, I believe your next slide is a blank slide, correct?
Correct.
Right. You did an evaluation to offer an opinion in court as to whether Mr. JONCHUCK was not guilty by reason of insanity. Have you formed that opinion?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That he was insane at the time of the offense.
What we've talked about so far, for the most part, is what part of that two-prong analysis?
Well, first of all, that the first prong is that he has a mental disorder, and he has a very severe mental disorder. He has a mental disorder that causes him to be out of touch with reality.
I'd now like you to talk to us about the second part of your opinion, which allows you to form the opinion of not guilty by reason of insanity. Can you tell us what that part of your opinion is?
That he did not know the wrongfulness of his behaviors.
Do you have any slides that document your opinion as to that?
Yes.
Show those to us, please.
As we've gone along, I've mentioned some of these things which indicate that he did not know the wrongfulness of his act. I'll highlight them. First of all, he was experiencing hallucinations and delusions at the time. He was out of touch with reality. He was experiencing very psychotic symptoms. And some of these symptoms included that the world was coming to an end. He had hallucinations and delusions of him and Phoebe being possessed by demons.
Now, this one here, did you get this from, this is not just John telling you this, other people told you this, correct?
Correct. He had the irrational belief that he and Phoebe had to die in order to save the world. These were all the thoughts that he was experiencing that night, as well as he had the hallucinations about the demons for at least a week. He had the hallucinations and delusions about the world coming to an end, and that he and Phoebe had to die around the time of the act. His behaviors also demonstrated that he lacked the awareness of the wrongfulness. Officer Vickers reported that dropping Phoebe and leaving the scene was done in a calm manner. He didn't race off. He wasn't trying to escape. Officer Vickers, in a very quick fashion, speeding away, Officer Vickers said, calmly away. He also reported he had no expression at the time. He didn't show expression that he was angry. He wasn't showing any emotion at all, going back to the negative symptoms.
At this time with Officer Vickers, you I think, mentioned this. Officer Vickers testified that he was out of his car with his gun drawn,
Yes.
ordering Mr. JONCHUCK to do something.
Yep.
And were the lights flashing, the police lights?
At that point, they were.
And Mr. JONCHUCK is refusing the orders of an armed police officer?
Yes. Detective Huff said that John was calm and emotionless and didn't act as someone who had thrown a child off a bridge. So doesn't appear to have the outward appearance of this traumatic event having occurred and him having caused this traumatic event. Sergeant Lamb said, I never saw any kind of reaction that would, never saw any kind of reaction that would show any kind of remorse going on at that point other than that he wanted the Bible. So he wasn't showing remorse. The only thing that he was showing emotion about was for his Bible at that time.
So at this time, the only thing he's concerned about is the Bible.
Yes. And as noted before, according to Officer Carter, he wanted to be taken to the Tampa airport, appearing not to understand or appreciate the traumatic nature of what just happened. Officer Carter also reported that he dropped her in the water and did not throw her again. That made some type of distinction.
John said that. In other words, John thought it made a difference.
Yes. Officer Carter said he never appeared upset. He said that, you don't know what I've been through. He wanted to know what he did wrong. Again, apparently not knowing what he did wrong. He had no emotion, just a stare, very flat affect. No angry expression at all.
Doctor, I want to focus on this statement right here for a moment. He wanted to know what he did wrong. Is that something that Officer Carter says that John said to Officer Carter, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that important in making your opinion?
Yes. He's very overtly inquiring. He obviously knows he's in trouble, but he doesn't know what he did that was wrong. And what was just brought up was the act was committed steps away from a law enforcement officer with a gun drawn. There's an expression, the policeman at the elbow test. And what it asks is, hypothetically, given the mental state of an individual, would they have committed this crime if a policeman was right by their side, right by their elbow? If they did, that would be an indication either they did not appreciate what they were doing, they did not understand the consequences of their actions, or they did not know the wrongfulness of their behaviors. And John didn't have a police officer right by him. He had an officer right in front of him with a gun drawn, which is clearly an indication that he wasn't aware of the wrongfulness of his actions.
Doctor, is that the end of your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
You could, and I know you want to, you can have a seat for a moment.
book them all?
Friday might be early, not so much. Thank you for your cooperation with that issue. The legal problems and everything.
Yeah, let's.
Okay, all right.